Hey there! Welcome to our module on reporting for SEO. I'm Judith Lewis, a strategic digital marketing consultant with over 27 years of experience. Throughout this module, we'll focus on the reporting side of SEO, but we'll also touch on other topics covered in other modules in this course, like keyword research and analytics for SEO. Check those out first for a deeper dive into the topics. But for now, let's start with a quick overview of what I mean by SEO reporting. An SEO report tracks a website's SEO performance. It tells a client which SEO efforts are working and which ones aren't. A good SEO report includes key metrics that assess every effort in play. And the more specific and targeted the report is for the client's main KPIs, the better. An SEO report should also offer high-level opportunities on what the client should do next. That is, it should recommend opportunities for improvement and growth. SEO reporting can come in many different formats, but a good report usually contains an executive summary or overview, demonstrations of how SEO efforts are or are not effectively hitting the client's main KPIs, an explanation of results and next steps, and possibly an appendix with more detail. So in this module, we'll cover how to define your audience and report to them, structure an SEO report, choose the right KPIs and metrics on which to report on KPIs and metrics with GA4, and build specific reports for technical, content, and e-commerce SEO. So let's dive right in with our first lesson. We'll be looking at formatting and the anatomy of an SEO report later. But first, let's talk about your audience, which will influence all your other reporting decisions. Let's talk about who your SEO reports matter most to. Your audience. Generally, you can assume that this is just your client. But to build a strong report, you need to understand who exactly will be looking at it and what's most important to them. One piece of that is communicating information in a way that your audience will be receptive to. While it may feel like an element of your research is really interesting, it may not be the type of detail that, say, a CMO would care about. But those details might be really interesting for a subject matter expert or SME. Overall, your report needs to communicate the right information to the right people in the right way in order to demonstrate the great work that you've done. So, to start, let's go over some high-level tips to consider before you build a report. First off, work with your stakeholder or the person who you report to and create an organizational chart or a way of positioning your stakeholders within their company at large. You may be reporting to a marketing manager, brand manager, or someone else who then needs to report to more senior level people. An organizational chart positions your direct reports in a flow chart with who they report to as the next level up or across, and then who that report reports to. This will help you generate reports that can be used to help highlight wins on your team easily at more senior levels. Remember, your job isn't just to show off the great work you've been doing to help the client. Your job is also to make your stakeholder contact look good to their boss. It's also important to understand the KPIs or key performance indicators and OKRs or objectives and key results, along with any other important metrics your stakeholder is measuring. A KPI is an outcome that lets us measure the result of a specific action in a specific way and helps us track the progress we're making towards business goals. For example, when I optimize a web page for a client, the KPI of the success of that optimization might be an increase in traffic to that page and an increase in the rankings of the keywords that the client is specifically targeting. If the page is ranking or traffic dropped and no other factors were at play, that would indicate that this action failed to meet the KPI for this work. Now, let's talk about two different audiences, SMEs versus C-suite stakeholders. SMEs often need more details that are focused around specific, actionable insights that are tied to business outcomes, like volume of sales per channel against target, traffic and conversion rate per channel, conversions by keyword. Often, these need to be time-bound or related to a specific period of time that the report covers. Keep SME reporting focused on the agreed KPIs. While you can include some of the detail behind your approach towards hitting and hopefully overachieving KPIs, it's not always necessary or even useful within the main report for SMEs. C-suite reporting is different and needs to be designed for a higher level view of the business. For this audience, focus on the bigger picture of the overall business and how your work fits into those objectives. Volume of sales by period, by channel, or just yours. Sales overall. Leads. While KPIs are helpful for reporting back to the CEO or other higher-ups, it's not always practical since they may deliver overly detailed insights into a specific business unit. Keep in mind that sometimes reporting to the owner of a business can be like reporting to a CEO. And other times, it's like reporting to someone who believes themselves to be an SME. If you're working for a small business, understanding the business goals and creating reports that work for them is essential and will get you and the SEO or marketing department the recognition you deserve for the work you do. Once you understand who you're creating your report for, it's time to actually put it together. In our next lesson, we'll talk about the structure of your reports. I'll meet you there. Let's talk about what should actually be in your SEO reports and the different formats they can take. It's important to understand that each report will be different depending on the work you've put in, but each type of report will have common elements. Let's dive in. The format that your report takes will impact your audience's perception of your work. You can use Word, Excel, PowerPoint, or a dashboard tool like Wix Studio. I've worked with government departments who liked each one of these. It's ultimately all down to your client's preferences. The most important thing is to make sure you ask them exactly what they want. You can use any method as long as you have your specific audience in mind. Whichever format you choose, readability and professionalism always count. Presentations created on Prezi are often difficult to review and don't communicate the central points of a report effectively due to its limitations. Also, try to avoid spreadsheets to deliver reports because it's difficult to communicate insights in such a data-heavy format. Let me give you a quick example. I had a client in the US who changed stakeholders really often. One of the biggest challenges was reformatting the report every time a new stakeholder came on board. Their needs within the business and what they needed to report on to their bosses was always changing. So part of my job was to choose the right format and information for each report to ensure they had what they needed to make themselves look good. So whatever you decide, validate the report structure and style with your key stakeholders before you put the work into creating it. Now, let's take a look at the overall structure of your reports. An executive summary concisely summarizes the contents of the report. Most of the time, you should make sure the executive summary isn't too specific. Explain your results, how they tie to individual and business objectives, and ensure that the KPIs are clearly stated with their relative measurements next to each one. From this, someone should be able to glean the essence of the report and, most importantly, make important business decisions after reading it. Also, think about the fact that your audience might not have time to read everything, or that your reports might be read out of context, or out of order, or even months later to bring new staff up to speed. If these reports aren't being delivered in person, with the ability for the audience to ask questions directly, you'll need to predict and preemptively answer any questions stakeholders might have. This is when an executive summary with specific reference to business imperatives comes in handy. Make sure to include a summary of the level of business impact for each point if you can. This could be the most impactful part of your report, so it's important to get it right. Next, you'll want to include a table of contents that outlines all of the main points in the report to make it easy to jump around and navigate your report quickly. You'll want to clearly state the KPIs you've been working toward, even though you already did that in the executive summary. You really want to make sure stakeholders can't miss them. Your table of contents shouldn't be excessive, and there should be a business-led reason behind each point. This table of contents goes into way too much detail, surfacing the elements within the report which are a part of a broader section. For example, the SEO content section. Tables of contents are intended as a way to navigate to the relevant section, not usually the minutiae of a report. This is just leading the reader to the section where all of these points are covered. And if your table of contents ends up being more than a page, check to see if there's any duplication or whether you could consolidate some of the points into a single table of contents entry. For the main report, you'll want to include a brief overview of the work you've done, focusing on the business impact for each of these elements. Present points in the order of the table of contents. This is where you can get into much more detail, but not too much. The report should convince the reader that the work done had a positive impact on the business, but remember that you need to include insights with data in your main report. Data without insights isn't a report, it's just data. You're the expert and can bring insight and understanding to raw data in a way no tool can. It's also helpful to break the report into sections. These sections should be logically related to each other, but don't have to be associated by tool or output style. That is, don't rely too heavily on a tool or white label reports. For example, a report section on rankings may combine several tool outputs. However, you'd want to consolidate findings like the number of keywords the page ranks for or what the site ranks for without listing each one. I had a client where one of the KPIs that the department had to reach each month was to increase the number of relevant keywords the site was ranking for. To keep things concise, we reported this as a single number without going into detail about each individual keyword. Then you should finish your report with either the actions that will be happening next or with a summary overview if this is the end of the project. For any report that's not a final report, there should always be a list of next actions, whether they're definitely happening or need to be approved. This way, you set out what the next phase of work will look like. Up to this point, you've demonstrated the business impact, so this is where you'll want to show off your forward-thinking, planning, and strategic mindset. The last important aspect of any report, no matter the format, is an appendix. This is where you can keep the minutiae of the report, detailed charts, data tables, or results that aren't relevant to the main body of the report, but help back up all of your claims and findings in the report. Some of my appendices have been longer than the report themselves. An appendix helps you be more efficient and targeted in your main content, and still helps answer all questions stakeholders might have without needing to load up a tool and take forever to get the required data set up and displayed. So that's the basic format your reports should follow. Up next, we'll talk about identifying the KPIs and goals you should be reporting on based on your client's business goals. I'll meet you there. So let's talk about what you should actually include in your SEO reports. Key metrics are the most important things a business tracks. They can indicate the strengths or weaknesses of a business. The reason key metrics are measured, sometimes daily, is to keep an eye on the health of the business. So in this lesson, let's look at some of the key metrics and KPIs. An example of a key metric might be sales based on profit, not on numbers. For example, a company may sell something with a profit margin of 1 unit of currency and, at the same price, sell a different item with a profit margin of 10 units of currency. Sales of the item with a 10 times profit margin are obviously more desirable than a 1 times profit margin. Measuring the number of sales of both, with a key focus on the higher profit margin, helps a company understand whether it's moving towards greater or lesser profitability. This doesn't mean businesses shouldn't track simple sales numbers, but it's more important to choose the right metrics when reporting on different activities. Different types of reports require different metrics to be measured. Technical audits are often made up of infrastructure elements, so they measure the before and after of things like the number of dead or bad internal links, the speed of a page, the number of valid pages before and after, possibly taken from Google Search Console, or the number of pages with snippets in the search results. And there are many, many more you can use depending on your client's needs. Those technical audit measurements mostly come from Google Search Console, Google Analytics, and external tools like Screaming Frog, Google Page Speed Testing Tool, and SEMrush. Content reports, on the other hand, are more focused on showing content-related business benefits. So they'll often use metrics like changes in monitored keyword rankings, the number of keywords either specific pages or the whole site ranks for, average time on a page, the number of pages visited per user, the number of pages ranking, sales made before and after, or conversion rate. And lastly, link reports are more focused on showing ranking and visibility business benefits. So they'll often look at the ranking of pages or keywords, the number of links found or built, the increase in visibility based on placed content on non-owned sites, and traffic from or sales made through links placed on non-owned sites. Just be cautious if you use these measurements. Most tools that give you these numbers don't give you a complete picture of the performance and health of any website. And speaking of those tools, in our next lesson, I'll show you some of the most reliable resources you can use to build an SEO report. I'll see you there. There are a ton of third-party tools that offer SEO-focused reports, but not all of these reports are useful. And even with the ones that are, the most valuable thing that can come from any set of data is the interpretation brought by an expert like you. So in this lesson, we'll talk about a few of the tools you can use to find the data that'll inform your analysis. Let's start with Google Analytics, or GA4. Its traffic acquisition report is often my secret weapon when I'm preparing to show senior stakeholders how important SEO is to their company. Here, you can see all channels together, including organic, paid, referral, and social. When it's set up, this will include revenue too, and can help you understand the impact SEO is having on the company. Some businesses feel SEO traffic is traffic they deserve and don't have to earn. Of course, we know that's not the case, but it's good to know that this can be a feeling among some senior stakeholders and might be a challenge we need to prepare for. If you do end up dealing with a stakeholder who believes organic traffic should be automatic or free, it can be helpful to remind them that even Google needs a little help. Over the years, they've even released specific fixes for website owners who couldn't even see their own sites in search results. Basically, Google isn't perfect, and it can't hurt to remind them of that upfront. Next, in the engagement landing page, you can add a filter to see how your landing page performed from the medium of organic search or the source of Bing or Google or Yahoo. You can also view both source and medium at the same time, but this creates a much larger report. With a more granular view, you may not be able to take advantage of. If you're able to demonstrate through this report the importance of each and every organic channel, make sure to highlight the importance of SEO on not only Google search, but also Bing and other search engines. If you have conversions on your site, the user purchase journey report will help you dig into where users may be dropping off if there's a cart or conversion issue. Head into Explore to create the path exploration report to see how people move through the site. Screenshot this report and, using your knowledge of the site, you'll be able to explain the paths through it. You'll also be able to spot issues where traffic drops off by examining those paths through the site, though this can't be used to track and identify a single user for privacy reasons. GA4 reports aren't as user-friendly as other products might be, so make sure you use page titles or URLs based on what your audience will respond to, while taking into account the limited display. And when you're writing your summary, you might need to take several screenshots of the data zoomed in on certain pages with a high drop-off or high conversion rate. Don't be afraid of describing things at the top level and placing a deep dive in the appendix for a closer look into the pages with significant things happening. And you don't need to analyze the behavior of every page. If a few different pages seem to be showing data that doesn't meet your expectations, then a further analysis with a tool like Hotjar might be necessary. And if the data suggests it, here is where you can argue for the additional cost. Unfortunately, Google Search Console doesn't show you all of the data out there, and no one source of data should ever be used on its own. Always use multiple data sources for your reports. As an example, if you're creating a link building report, then I recommend pulling in a few different sources of information, since they'll all have different information in them as part of your benchmarking. I personally lean on Majestic, Google Search Console, and SEMrush data, though you don't have to use those specific sources, as there are others like Ahrefs. Each tool gives me a different view of what links there are coming into the site, and I include each one that I expect to continue using for the duration of the project or retainer. And a quick heads up, If you don't have a license for a tool, you may need to purchase one to continue reporting. I include the name of each tool with their associated data in my reports. My preference is for visual reports, so I might include a screenshot from each tool with the data in question, but if you're less visual, you can use a line per tool with the old data first and the new data second, unless the client requests otherwise. Here's an example of a Looker Studio report with some data visualization and no commentary. This was built for a client, but doesn't give him the information he needs in the way he'd prefer to see it. We used the API to pull data in from the source we were requesting. Here, the data from Google Analytics was pulled in without any additional work. There is no explanation for why things are up or down. The data is simply rearranged from the native GA4 dashboard into this one. You can see why the client wasn't happy, because he could have gotten this from GA4. What he wanted was the why behind the data, as well as some graphs to help him really see the trends. Now, we can see that the data has been really segmented into some great visualizations here. So why is the client unhappy? The client was unhappy because he isn't the expert. And while he can guess at why things were moving and changing, he doesn't know why. A great way to help save this Looker Studio report would be to add text boxes through the report and use a single monthly view with your data analysis to export and send to the client. Here's a great example of a Looker Studio report with some data visualization and commentary, where the why of the data is explained. Raw data forces people to guess, but here, the commentary explains the data. So far, we've covered what should be in your report, who you're creating it for, and where you can get your data. In our next lesson, we'll get more in-depth on a specific part of SEO you'll likely need to report on, technical SEO. I'll meet you there. Technical SEO reports cover specific elements of the site, like improving site speed, fixing broken links, resolving 404 errors, and making sure search engines can properly crawl and index the site. These reports don't usually cover content or links, except for the very specific ways they impact the technical side of a site. For example, let's say your client has a content-heavy page with a 4K video that causes a 5-minute load time. Maybe you need to think about that content's performance and its technical impact. That's the kind of technical element you might add to a report. But it can be all too easy to go too deep into technical SEO reports and lose the audience. So let's talk about how to report on technical SEO while keeping your audience in mind. It can be challenging to visualize technical elements in a report, so I suggest breaking the information into 3 main areas or sections: code or on-page elements, load elements, and overall site architecture or full site elements. The example I gave before of an image or video taking too long to load could go under the section on load elements. In that example, after fixing it, I might report that a change to the site to improve speed was successful. I would use a simple graphic to show the before and after and explain how it impacted the business. For example, did sales increase because the site sped up? Or did the rankings go up, resulting in increased traffic, which then resulted in increased sales or leads or other KPIs? One of the ways I show a change in site speed is to use Lighthouse in Google Chrome. You may also want to use Google's Site Speed Checker or other site speed checkers. There are a few standard templates you can use to structure your technical reports. First, let's look at one that's very detailed, designed for a subject matter expert to read. This report includes elements from the most severe and in need of urgent attention, like 404 pages, redirect chains or errors, and Google Search Console issues, up to things which would be nice to do but are expensive from a development point of view. You might also include things like broken footer links or headline tags used as design elements instead of headlines, like an H3 used after an H1 because the CSS makes it look the way the designer wants. Other suggestions may include minifying JavaScript, which wouldn't have enough impact to prioritize it over other things. Green is what I can live with. Yellow makes me nervous, and red means that I am willing to come in and just make the changes myself to get it working. This template, on the other hand, has been designed to be more concise and communicate more directly to a senior level stakeholder. It's been set up so we can do some storytelling with the data. We are not falsifying anything, but rather using data to draw the reader in and help them understand what we've learned. Visual support here is key. Everything ties to one of the business KPIs we talked about defining in the first lesson of this course. So here, I focus on page speed, CLS, INP, and other Google measures, showing how we either are or are not in the green, and how we expect to fix it if we're not in the green. You can see here how visual these elements have been made by Google already. It's a smart way to visualize difficult data. And you always want to show how these measurements relate directly to the customer's experience on the site. This is super important for making sales, generating leads, or other metrics that the business may use to measure success. Your technical SEO report could be created in a number of ways, but this is how I structure mine. Wherever I show graphs on the page speed from Lighthouse, I also include other graphs from GTmetrix, SEMrush, and Screaming Frog. This is an example of how I've shown the monetary value of technical SEO to someone who is very skeptical of SEO and was about to cut our budget. This kind of communication is often essential in building effective SEO budget arguments. Note how I prioritize the future work on this page of my report. Showing past work is only part of what your report should include. And given development resources are usually very limited, you'll also need to work with the team to get your needs into the appropriate sprint or period of work, depending on how the developers work. You can also show how your work has impacted sales positively and how your technical changes impacted various other elements of improvements on the site. If you're reporting on interim work and the changes aren't finalized yet, show the expected impact and how it'll help the business reach its goals. It's all about demonstrating value in a report, as much as it's about communicating what you've done and what you expect to do. Now, let's look at the other side of the coin, content SEO. That's what we'll cover in our next lesson. See you there. Content reports are just as important as any other kind of SEO report. But it can be difficult to communicate the business impact of content SEO effectively. These reports can quickly become nothing more than a list of URLs with a lot of data next to them, which isn't exactly useful for anyone. When you're creating reports for content SEO, make sure you weigh a number of different elements and then present the client with the results, not just talk them through the raw data. Your content analysis report should include important measurements like traffic from all sources, traffic from organic searches, links, and revenue. I also like to include measurements like links from Google Search Console, Majestic, and SEMrush as separate checks, and Google Search Console traffic, and ranking for the page on average. I find that extra data helps me demonstrate to my client why we made the decisions we made. Just like your other SEO reports, it's important to always use data from more than one source here. Let me paint you a picture. One of my former clients decided to delete a piece of content they thought wasn't performing well based on one set of data, but it actually was performing well. The tool they were using just wasn't working. We need to provide raw data to demonstrate the why behind decisions to cull content, redirect content, merge content, or whatever you decide to do with existing content. Don't make this the main presentation point in your report, though. Keep it in my favorite place, the appendix. Reports for research around new content have a whole different set of data behind them, including the number of competitors ranking for it, search volume, and alignment with existing content. Trying to include everything from the number of articles to research, outreach, and more can be overwhelming to present on top of data. So I recommend segmenting your reports to look at existing content for regular auditing, with a separate section for outreach opportunities for content, and another section that pulls together research for content the client can work on. Let's talk about the actual template you can follow. For content reports, you want to show the results and recommendations you've made during your analysis of the data. Mention the number of data points you're basing your analysis on, and show the raw data to support your recommendations. For example, you might have recommended 10 articles for deletion, and so you'd show all traffic to the articles from Google Analytics 4. You'd also show links to those articles from tools like Majestic, SEMrush, and Ahrefs, and the general ranking of that page, rather than individual specific keywords from Google Search Console. You might also recommend 17 article gaps that need to be filled based on keyword gap analysis in SEMrush. You'd be looking at where you don't rank, but 2 or 3 of your competitors do. Or highlight 5 top performing articles or pages. And so you'd show traffic from all sources and break out SEO traffic, links to that page, and if it's relevant and it's set up, you'd show conversions involving that page as a touch point. You might also offer an analysis of the current content and how it's performing. You might suggest that your client doesn't need 5 million pages of content based on an analysis of the competitor landscape. If everyone else is covering a very relevant topic and you aren't, should you create content to cover that topic? For example, I once found a smaller competitor of a real estate website that was using phone area codes in the rental market. My client wasn't doing that at that point, and their bigger competitors weren't either. We knew this was an untapped area, so we jumped at the opportunity. So I recommend breaking your report into broad areas. And if you have both audited and new content recommendations, start with the audit, since it represents the client's past work. Then move into the competitor report, which could possibly be bad news, and then present the research and reporting into the work to be done, since that represents the future and is a positive way to finish. For audits, don't just present the raw data, but instead visualize it. For example, you can see here how I've used organic traffic and revenue from GA4 and then a link example. What I wanted to show here was that the number of pages that had poor organic traffic were overlapping with poor sales, though all traffic may not have been as clear a measure. You don't have to do this in every report, but you do need to simplify your data down from spreadsheets into something more visually accessible. In fact, I did a search for content audit reports and looked in Google Images, and most of the results were lists of URLs with data against them. So stick with my advice here, and you'll already be way ahead of the game. Next up, to calculate forecasting, you can either use a tool like SEO Monitor, or you can use a simple formula, assuming a click-through rate based on rankings you estimate you could achieve. Use Google Ads estimations, which tend to be low, then multiply those estimations by the percentage click-through rate based on where you feel you could rank, and that gives you an estimation per month and per year. This is all supported by data in a separate document, which should always be included in your appendix, though it's rarely looked at. You might also include an analysis of the length and targeting of the content. If you do this in your analysis, I recommend combining it with content keyword targeting, showing how many keywords are related to the topic the content ranks for, and where you feel improvements could be made as a result. This focuses the data on both length and diversity of relevant keyword rankings as well. Here's an example of how you might show how different pages with different content lengths rank for different numbers of keywords, and therefore help you justify changes. Rankings are a popular content-based metric to report on, but they can also be confusing for a client. The overview reports that tools like Ahrefs and SEMrush create to show trends are often easier for clients to digest. And while the long list of keywords monitored and their month-on-month and year-on-year change can be recorded in the appendix, it's easier to understand trends with a line graph. Now that you've tackled what's happened in the past, it's time to look forward. As you can see, what's already live for content reports in an auditing tool like SEMrush or Ahrefs, the reports section on the analysis and potential future content, and the frequency and speed that it'll be delivered should be pared down as much as possible. Instead of presenting everything you looked at and all the search volumes, visualize it as topics with numbers of potential pieces of content around each topic and the traffic potential from each, if that's a metric you're using. It can be helpful here to show how many topics your competitors are ranking for as well. I usually classify ranking well as top 10, but you might define it differently. Your client just needs to see how the research and work you've done equates into sales, leads, or traffic, depending on what you established as important KPIs for their business. If this is for an internal presentation, remember to always tie it back to each stakeholder's KPIs or OKRs, so that it's as much about the company achieving their goal as it is about individuals. But for this section of your report, you don't need to include as much data as you did in previous sections. The skill is in reducing the data down to easily understandable, concise summaries. Your appendix will help you demonstrate the complex analysis behind the deceptively simple presentation. With all this data, it's likely your appendix for a content report will be quite large, but you'll have streamlined the main areas of the report itself into smaller, digestible chunks that can be understood by anyone without any marketing background. So that's your content report. In our last lesson, we'll cover one more type of SEO report you'll likely have to create at some point, an e-commerce report. I'll meet you there. When it comes to e-commerce clients, there are extra elements you might want to add to your SEO reports, from technical considerations to content and links. So in our last lesson, I'll walk you through putting one together while taking everything we've covered so far in this module into consideration. E-commerce is impacted by both technical and content SEO. While you might usually separate these reports, both of them have a huge impact on e-commerce sites, and so each should have a section dedicated to e-commerce wherever it's relevant. In terms of technical considerations, you might have faceted navigation, which doesn't create a separate page, but instead offers a variety of filters on a single URL. Faceted navigation can cause a number of problems. This is where technical and content SEO overlap. For example, faceted navigation can cause problems with duplicate content, index bloat, or problems crawling the website. This issue is common on websites selling clothes, and it's the type of thing that your report can illuminate for an e-commerce client by taking all of the relevant information, bringing it together, and making it easy for the client to understand. E-commerce reports should also report on revenue based on the organic channel. This may mean segmenting the organic traffic from a variety of different search engines and indicating what the revenue and average order value is for each of the different search engines. In the case where there's very little or no income from a search engine, don't bother with it. It usually takes more time than it's worth. Reporting on traffic by channel can help illuminate the revenue per channel. Remember, we want to avoid simply having data for data's sake, and we want to make sure that when we report on traffic by channel and revenue by channel, that there's a reason for it. Naturally, different channels are going to perform differently. While paid search or social only deliver revenue when spending is active, organic search can be a constant source of traffic. Also, organic social revenue may depend on activity, whereas direct will fluctuate depending on when people go straight to the site. You may simply want to show trends over time rather than deep data. Most businesses, however, will be interested in a breakdown of revenue by channel and traffic by channel. It's worth noting that there'll be a limit to the sources of revenue if based on medium and not source. It's also important to report on the various paths that searchers take through the website. If users are behaving differently from paid search, as opposed to SEO or any other way, it might be important to monitor and possibly flag this discrepancy. Remember, if possible, use more than one tool when analyzing traffic and user flow through the site. And remember to report on SEO assists, where SEO pulls people in, but other channels convert. SEO is only one channel, and some businesses may also be using affiliates, paid search, paid social, organic social, PR, link building, and more. Each source will contribute conversions on a different level. If possible, see if you can show where SEO is assisting in a sale using tools like the reports in GA4. You'll want to report on how the average order value changes through the year in relation to SEO as a channel and how it performs against the whole site average. Include month-on-month and year-on-year changes to the top grossing URLs of the website. This can be done over time to show how these pages either have or haven't changed. Just keep in mind, we expect seasonality to impact the top revenue pages month-on-month and year-on-year. And if you're demonstrating the value of SEO, Remember to contrast it against paid channels in order to demonstrate your client's return on investment. And lastly, remember to report on Google organic shopping results from the free inclusion in Google Shopping to really exemplify the value that SEO brings your e-commerce clients. And that's it. Meet me in our very last lesson for a quick recap of everything we've covered together. Over the past few lessons, we've covered a few different sides of SEO reporting. We've started off with some foundational concepts, understanding who your audience is when you're building a report, and the basic information that's essential in every SEO report. Then we talked about setting smart KPIs for your specific client and the tools you can use to measure those goals. And we finished up by looking at 3 different types of SEO reports you might build: technical, content, and e-commerce. Now you're ready to start building in-depth, well-informed reports to show all of your clients the value that you bring to their businesses. Thanks for watching.